Thank you. My name is David Black, and for my sins, I'm a specialist in communications pedagogy. I do research in the area and have become a sort of a scholar of media literacy and communications education, largely just because I've been teaching for so long, it's all I can do. So might as well make a virtue of all that endless labor of teaching. Last time I checked, I've taught about 80 courses in the last 20 years, which is aging me before your eyes. Now, what I want to do today is to, this is especially addressed to the non-communication students in the audience, because I know there are a few of you out there who already know some of this stuff, is to elevate and, in some sense, move aside your ordinary, everyday understanding of how the media work, how you experience it, and most importantly, how the media is talked about in the public arena, in civil society. Because one of the great obstacles, one of the great obstacles to me as a media educator and as someone who works with professional organizations and in more traditional university contexts around communications education is the fact that our media leads a conversation about the nature and the impact of media and the kinds of issues that we're taught to take seriously with respect to media, things like censorship or bias or ownership, that although those things are important, tend to get in the way of a deeper understanding of how we live with media. So to phrase it more succinctly, the conversation that we conduct in our society that is largely led by the media themselves, and to some extent by secondary institutions like the education system, like various moral entrepreneurs, like religious leaders, for example, or parents groups, tends to obscure and get in the way of an understanding of media rather than really help the conversation. And so what I want to do is to change the tone, change the channel with respect to how we might think more critically, more productively, more expansively about our experience of media today. And I define media today very liberally. Everything from a conversation over dinner, assuming you're still into that kind of old-fashioned, low bandwidth kind of medium, to the most elaborate multimedia experience. So you have the Jumbotron in your living room and all the things that you do with that. So media, in some sense, is a kind of total experience, and it's from that I want to proceed. Now, I've offered this cheeky title, because Facebook is sort of the medium du jour at the moment, to underline the fact that even as we immerse ourselves in media, even as we talk about them, as we use them, again, defining media very liberally, that we're missing so much about what the consequences of media are for our lives, for the lives of our coworkers, our friends, our family, the people that we know. What I've done is to organize this into 10 points. 10 points I've distilled from a vast amount of communication, media, and cultural theory. So what you're getting are some of the highlights, some of the kind of high-level conclusions that scholars from many different traditions of theory, philosophical positions in communication studies have arrived at after years of study. So you're getting some of the best stuff that at least my discipline has to offer, and that's good. And I've offered them in the form of a kind of series of intellectual haiku, if you will, or koans, sort of crisp, somewhat opaque things to think about and let your mind work on them. McLuhan called his media haiku probes. And his concern, and I tend to take some of my cues from McLuhan in today's presentation, is that we need to not address how we think, but how we experience the world through our senses, the level of perception, not conception. So what he tried to do was to interrupt your sensory input, was to challenge the ways in which you experience the world on sensory terms. And he liked to use puns and paradoxes. And so in that spirit, I've done something of the same in this. to construct a kind of conversation about media. And although I only have till 8 and I have a few clips to share with you, I'll try to put some questions to you as well. Media are not objects, technologies, or institutions, but of course they are all those things. They are environments and, in some sense, organisms. And this point is maybe best appreciated on demographic terms. There are probably a few Gen Y people in this room, and all of you either have children who are Gen Y or work with Gen Y, and you probably look at their consumption and use of media and think, boy, they do it differently. The way they engage with media, the way they play in it, the way they are creative with it is very different than what I experienced certainly growing up in the 70s, albeit in the darkest, deepest part of rural Ontario, where we hardly had telegraph. Now, of course, media are objects. They're the box in our living room. They're the letter that we're writing to a friend. They're the PC or the laptop in our workplace or in our homes. And of course, they are technologies. They are the creation of various kinds of engineering and creative decisions combined with certain material discoveries and issuing in some technological form. And lastly, of course, they're institutions. We think of the CRTC, we think of the CBC or CTV, we think of Amazon, we think of Facebook as corporations, public or private, in the business of offering news and information. But what we forget, but what Gen Y has remembered or rediscovered, or, if you will, made visible something that we already knew intuitively, is that media are also environments. Consider this. As human beings, of necessity, we live in culture. Oh yes, like other animals, we breathe, we eat, we sleep, we have certain animal functions. But the world in our heads is one constituted through meaning, and only largely through meaning. Sort of rational meanings, meanings that derive from our senses, from our sense of ourselves in history, etc. Meaning, culture, human existence as we experience it in our heads travels fundamentally through media. Both new media and old, paper-based, verbal, etc. We live inside, if you will, a complex, vast multimedia system. We think of media connection in terms of plugging something in or ensuring that one technology talks to another. But taking a page here from McLuhan's work, and McLuhan very much worked with the sense of the media as an environment, we realize that every medium we engage with is, at the same time it's sending us content and telling us a story or selling us a product or offering us the daily news, is also, believed McLuhan and other media ecologists, involving us in subconscious patterns. Patterns that affect our sense of self, affect how we relate to other people, that, if you will, are fundamentally massaging, as McLuhan liked to say, massaging the deeper parts of ourselves. So every medium we engage with, from the oldest dead tree medium to the newest high-tech device, the iPad, etc., is, if you will, apart from its actual explicit content, also emitting a pattern, a cognitive, sensual, bodily pattern that engages us and transforms us in ways that we don't fully expect. So think of it as a kind of footprint that every medium, defined individually and collectively, emits. And if you consider that the world is full of media, and all those media, from conversation through to the internet, are sending out these footprints and engaging us in these patterns, and you can respect that we don't deal with media in isolation, this conversation, that email, this book, that website we visit, but we are constantly, if you will, immersed in these competing and often dissonant patterns, constantly working at us, looking, if you will, to kind of conscript us to those patterns. And for McLuhan, this is largely happening on a subconscious basis. We like to think of our engagement with media as primarily rational. We watch the news, Peter Mansbridge or Pamela Wallen or Lisa LaFlamme, sort of telling us what's happening. But the truth is that we engage with media fundamentally at a subconscious level. And in that, then, our deepest, darkest, most private sort of persona are engaged constantly by these technologies and the patterns they emit. Having said that then, having sort of acknowledged the inevitable, the positive side is this. It falls to us to take responsibility for the cultural environment as much as we do for nature. We have amassed incredible organizational resources to address the problems of the natural world, be it tar sands, be it dying salmon, be it climate change. Lots and lots of organizations, lots of petitions, lots of activity concerned to bring nature back to health. We have far less committed to recovering our culture, recovering it from commercialism, recovering it from propaganda, recovering it from ownership patterns that tilt media ownership to a very, very small group of people with incredible power and often very conservative views of the way things work. So the culture is where we live as people. It's in our heads, it's at our fingertips, it's what we share with people. And we need to approach it with the same vigor and sense of social conscience that people who belong to Greenpeace or PETA or any other organization approach those kind of, if you will, issues that are embedded in the natural world. Number 2, media is a form of relationship. Media is a form of relationship. Now, when you think about the word media, those of you who like a little grammar, what is the word media? What is it in grammatical terms? Very simply. It's a noun, right? But we don't experience media as nouns. They're not inert, separate things, right? Media are relationships. If you look at media as verb and not noun, your whole sense of the way media kind of work in the world and the way they involve us changes. Media are about relationships. Now, our sensory, our sensory bubble, if you will, the immediate sensory world that we live in is quite limited. It's limited to the places you've traveled, the people you've talked to, the food you've tasted, the wine you've drank. Meanwhile, there are 6 billion or more people out there, all doing their own, involved in their own sensory adventure, if you will. And your only sense of them, and your only sense of history, and your only sense of many of the places in the world that you'll never visit, never taste, never touch directly, come through various media forms. So our sense of the world in its most expansive sense, our sense of ourselves in history or in the contemporary moment, is defined almost exclusively, except for that small kind of sensory bubble we live in, through media consumption. And we assume a kind of transparency. You watch the travelogue and you're in Italy. You watch the reality TV and you're in that house with the other contestants from Big Brother or on that far-flung island with the contestants from Survivor. We assume a kind of immediacy, a kind of transparency, a kind of a simplicity in decoding because of the grammar, notably of television. TV is so easy. It is so self-evident. It falls over itself trying to seem and make the world as transparent as possible to you. And hence a lot of the world's complexity, a lot of its diversity, a lot of its profundity goes missing because of the fact that we, of necessity, must engage with it through mediated terms. And a way to pick this up and how different this is if anyone here has lived abroad and read national newspapers in those countries, the very different kinds of understandings that are projected about, say, North America. If you've worked in Pakistan or lived in England or, like myself, spent some time in Africa, the view of the world that's there is one that you never hear, that is largely sort of lost to you and is very tied to a local or a national context, but lost, if you will, within a media system that is, because of the way the world works, largely Western, largely liberal democratic in its orientation. So in this sense, media construct what we know of citizenship, what we know of consumption, what we know of family life, what we know of intimacy and its most profound. Media are constantly creating relationships for us between events and moments in time, between aggregate and individual people, between everything we think the world is about. the imprint of media, the grammar of media is constantly inside that thing. And understanding that changes how we relate to the world. Number 3, media do not reflect the world, but they construct it. Our media system, notably the news media, make much of what scholars call the mirror metaphor, or the reflectionist hypothesis. I'll put this question to you. What is one of the most powerful forms of credibility a news anchor can offer? What makes for good news? When you look at a news program, you know, the 30-minute news or a feature, what is its credibility deriving from? Well, disaster, yes, so the coups and earthquakes. That's right. But accuracy, right? A page of history ripped off and presented. We're going to reflect the world as it truly is, as it's happening right now.
But as it truly is, as we interpret it.
Yes, of course, allowing for. Sorry?
Neutrality.
It's to be neutral. It's to be impartial. I mean, that's the self-representation the media engages in, right? Okay. Now, when media talk to advertisers, the conversation is very different. It's all about influencing, it's all about changing, it's all about modifying behavior. When media talk out of the news world, or they talk to the CRTC, or they talk in public about themselves, they identify as neutral, as impartial, as not influencing how people vote or behave or their values, etc. Media neutrality is strongly identified. Because if we were actually cognizant of how influential media were, we might want to lock up our televisions. We might want to shut down our keyboards. We might want to be more vigorously involved as citizens in helping shape the kind of media ecology that's emerging around us. And yet when media talk to policymakers, talk to regulators, talk in public, they do so in the most neutral tones. We're there to represent the world. We're not there to influence people. We're not there to change how people see things. When they talk to advertisers, the conversation is very different. We're going to take this demographic, and we're going to ensure that we sell them this message, this product, with this kind of success rate. So the conversation behind the scenes is all about influence. The conversation in the public eye is about neutrality, about distance, about the ineffectiveness of media as a powerful source of behavior modification. The objectivity, that's right. Now, that's one level of addressing this, but there's actually a deeper philosophical level. There's a branch of communication theory called semiotics, the science of signs. SEMIOTICS. I'm going to actually play a brief clip from one of the master semioticians, Stuart Hall, in just a moment. What we have to recognize here is that language itself, the way in which we talk about language, is often, again, in terms of this notion of language as a mirror to the world, language as a drink of water, as a kind of transparent, immediate way of accessing meaning. The reality is that language, and by extension media, which are really organized forms of language, are forces in the world as powerful as guns, as powerful as money, as powerful as a bulldozer. That language, and by extension media, are not neutral mirrors, are not merely transparent tools that we use to kind of share meaning like we were handing it off to somebody, but they are effective shapers of the world. And the word we give to thinking about language in these terms, it's a theoretical word, is the term discourse. Discourse, D-I-S-C-O-U-R-S-E. The recognition that language is not just a private thing that we use as we exchange ideas and experiences, but is a material force in the world as real as anything else, and maybe greater. Because many believe that media are now moving from the periphery to the center of our society. And this reflects hiring patterns, organizations putting communications officers in place, It reflects the growing power of media to politics, for good or ill. The Obama campaign absolutely depended on the internet and on social media. I was a volunteer with that group. I saw a lot of things happening there. So what we realize here is that media, and by extension, going back, language, construct the world, they act the world, they constitute our sense of self and the world we live in. They are not passive, reflective, transparent things. Just a bit of the Stuart Hall, please. This is the greatest living media theorist, Stuart Hall, attached to what's known as the Birmingham tradition. No, that's not it. No. It's this one, Tim, here. Sorry. This comes from the Media Education Foundation. It's the best media education house in North America.
Just let me say what your main theme of what I would say today is. I'm going to talk about the notion of representation, which is a very common concept in cultural studies.
You'd encourage you to stay closer to the blackboard. When you
I
pass
want to
around.
explore the idea a little bit, and I want to try and say something about how I understand representation working, and why it's a more difficult and more complex subject than it appears to begin with. I'm talking about largely visual representation, or the examples I'm going to try to cite are from visual representation, but I think what I'm going to say has a bearing on the practices of representation in general. I choose visual representation because it's a kind of cliche to say that in the modern world, our culture is saturated by the image in a variety of different forms. So the image itself, whether it's moving on still, and whether transmitted by a variety of different media, seems to me to have become the privileged sign of late modern culture. And late modern culture is not only that culture which one finds in the advanced industrial, post-industrial societies of the Western world, but because of the global explosion in communication systems, it is also the saturating medium, the saturating idiom of communication worldwide. So I think to try and take the idea of representation to the image is an important question. And cultural studies has paid a tremendous amount of attention in one way or another to the centrality of representations and the practice of representation, and media studies itself is, in an obvious sense, concerned in part with the variety of different texts, in my instance, visual text representations, which are transmitted by the media. But I'm going to stand back from that a bit to begin with and try and look at the process of representation itself.
So that's the mirror metaphor he's attacking.
Now, the word has a kind of double meaning, even in its common sense, understanding. It does mean to present, to image, to depict, to offer a depiction of something else. And the word representation or representation does sort of carry with it the notion that something was there already and through the media has been represented. Nevertheless, this notion that somehow representation represents a meaning which is already there is a very common idea, and on the other hand, one of the ideas that I'm going to try to subvert. So I give you the common sense meaning to try to take it back a little bit is what I'm going to say. But then there's another understanding of the word representation which also plays a role in what we bring to this topic, because we speak of political figures as representing us in some way. We don't probably say that very often these days, because we may not think they represent us very well, but they're sort of supposed to represent us, and in that sense, they stand in for us. They are our representatives. Where we can't be, they can be. So the notion of something with images and depicts and that which stands in for something else, both of those ideas are kind of brought together in the notion of representation. Now, what this idea that media practices, among other things, represent topics, represent types of people, represent events, represent situations. What we're talking about is the fact that in the notion of representation is the idea of giving meaning. So representation is the way in which meaning is somehow given to the things which are depicted through the images or whatever it is on screens or the words on page, which stand for what we're talking about. And if you think that the meaning that it is giving is very different from, or a kind of distortion of what it really means, then your work on representation would be in measuring that gap between what one might think of as the true meaning of an event or an object and how it is presented in the media. And there's a lot of very good work which is in media studies, which is exactly like it.
Thanks, Tim. So what he's doing there is criticizing the mirror metaphor. The idea that there is meaning in the world, and all the media does is simply to find it and reflect it back to us. This is the basic trope or metaphor used in news media, used in entertainment media. We get a slice of reality given back to us. But in fact, the truth, as Hall will go on to say, this is the greatest living media scholar today, is that media, language itself, are putting meaning into the world. That there are no intact, embedded, permanent meanings out there except which we have put there. And so the issue of who puts them there, how they're put there, and the fact that they're put there in the first place invites choice, invites perspective, invites change, creates a very different kind of world. A world not of permanent meanings that we simply discover or shine the light on, if you will, but rather a world which is contested, which is invented, which is created. And this is a very empowering idea, this basic premise in semiotics. Number 4. This comes from my favorite media scholar, Raymond Williams. There's no such thing as a mass audience, but only ways of thinking of audiences as masses. Both in politics and in media scholarship through most of the 20th century, the assumption was that the so-called mass audience was stupid, was politically vulnerable, was being manipulated to sell ideas to or products to. And media theory, in some sense, was supportive of a kind of critique of democracy in and of itself. That democracy was not to be trusted, that democracy was too important to be given over to the people. That the whole notion of collective action got a kind of bad rap, if you will, both in media and also in democracy in general. Come the era of the internet, and scholarship has rediscovered the virtue of collective action, has turned, if you will, the spectacle of millions of people kind of in their zombified form watching America's Most Wanted or whatever the really bad TV of the moment might be, and instead looking at the media consumer as him or herself a producer, really opening up this notion of collective action as a force for good. Now, why is this important? Because in the post-war world, as people fled to their suburbs and to privatized lives, what Williams calls lives of mobile privatization, traveling in cars, going to suburbs, not connecting with people, shuttling from work and from home, we lost the sense, if you will, of the benefit of collective enterprise to do all kinds of good, create good businesses, create good neighborhoods, address various kinds of social causes. One thing the internet has done, say scholars, is reawakened us to what one scholar, Hal Reingold, calls smart mobs. Again, reclaiming collective action because the internet, in some sense, frees it up. It liberates it in a way that television did not. Brings us to number 5. Clay Shirky is one of the latest and sort of most popular theorists of social media. And if anybody here is doing work in social media, running some kind of social media project in your business life, et cetera, Read his book, Here Comes Everybody, and read his book, Cognitive Surplus. These are just out. There are a lot of social media books out there. They're perfectly fine, but they're not really thoughtful. They're not really cerebral. They're more about how to make a buck from Facebook. Okay, fair enough. This, Clay Shirky, is a scholar at New York University whose job it is, more than almost anybody else, to make high, critical, thoughtful sense of the role of social media in our lives, be they wikis, be they podcasts, be they Facebook, etc. His latest book, just published, is called Cognitive Surplus. And it's good news for all of those of you, probably like me, who spent too much time watching television when you were growing up. Who knows, all the episodes from Gilligan's Island and could probably, retail them as necessary. Now, Shirky's point in Cognitive Surplus, what he means by that is this. If you were born in roughly 1960, I was born in 64, you've spent 50,000 hours watching television. That's not, by and large, very creative time, but that's 5.5 years of your life, 50,000 hours. As we move from a TV-based culture to an internet-based culture, all that time, defined globally, begins to be freed up and used for arguably better things. Shirky argues there are about 1 trillion hours a year, 1 trillion with a T, globally, that are freed up as people move from TV, or never had TV in the first place, to internet-based communication. Now, the internet, is a place where people create LOL cats and end their marriages. Lots of bad things happen there too. But think of Wikipedia. Wikipedia took a small percentage of that cognitive surplus. And although some of Wikipedia, of course, is kind of farcical and silly, there's a lot of stuff there that's really good. And the product, if you will, of people using the cognitive surplus that's been freed up from the decline of the TV era and using that time, that remarkable amount of time and pent-up creativity for good. So you'll see this phrase a lot now, cognitive surplus in our culture. Shirky's a very big deal. Next. The medium is the message. Of course, you probably associate this with the work of Marshall McLuhan. And if you could play the McLuhan clip, please. Everybody's heard this phrase, no one knows what it means. I'm going to tell you what it means.
TV sucks the brain right out of the skull. So next seminar we'll prove the content of television. Professor McCool should content of television is movies, but the message of television is what it does to us, the users.
Are you saying the medium is more important than the message you give?
No. The medium is not more important than the message. It's obvious. The medium is the message. The medium is the message. What does that mean? Well, of course, the medium is the message. It's what I thought of great idea. Let print change the shape of the world.
I never read newspapers. I get in only or back.
This medium changed the way the world thinks about communications. It's the message, and the content must be the audience. And of course, electronic information is turning the world into a global village. Take light bulbs, they're an information medium.
Great. That's your tax dollars at work. That's a heritage moment. Of course, that's not actually McLuhan. It's an actor playing McLuhan. Now, any Canadian probably has tattooed somewhere on their body, the medium is the message, especially if you live in Victoria, where there's a whole economy just based on cafes and tattoo parlors. How we do that is amazing. I don't know. The medium is a message simply means this. When we think about media, we often default immediately to thinking about content, right? We think about the show, we think about the article, we think about plot, we think about character, we think about special effects. That's where a conversation as individuals and a society tends to go. And content's not unimportant. But McLuhan compared the content in a news story, or if you'd lived long enough, in a web page, to the bait the burglar offers the dog as the burglar breaks into your home. It seduces us into a relationship with the medium as a form. The important dimension for media, says McLuhan, is not content. Content diverts us, it distracts us, it entertains us. It becomes a fetish for us. But the influential part is not the story, not the characters, not the plot, but the technological form as it engages with, as I said earlier, largely our subconscious and the kinds of identities that we inhabit collectively and individually. That certain media, says McLuhan, emphasize the power of certain senses among the 5 we have, and, if you will, suppress others. So he talked about, for example, the printed page as a visual medium. It inflates the power of the eye. Here's an example. The word enlightenment, right, which is a period in history that follows from the 18th century largely to the sort of the middle of the modern era, say the 1950s. Enlightenment, eye, illumination, shedding light on the Dark Ages, etc. It was a culture of the eye, a culture that venerated seeing as knowing, seeing as, if you will, the source of truth. Because the power of the eye for McLuhan is as both a sense in our bodies and also as a cultural value emphasized and made resonant and made large in our history. So the medium as a message is a pun. It's a joke. It's a probe. Meant to make you think, like any good pun should. He loved puns. The medium, the technology, is the content of our lives because the patterns that these technologies create in our lives become the stuff and substance of our experience. We are people of the internet. The internet's patterns, digital media's patterns, largely subconscious, become the substance, the content, if you will, of our lives. The medium and the patterns it emits is the message. It's the content of our lives. Number 7. How do we know it's true or real in a culture fundamentally based in images? I mean, we confront a paradox every time we watch the nightly news. We think of words as rational means of organizing meaning and images as largely emotional, right? You paint a picture, you go to an art gallery, you see a photo. Images are primarily emotional and sensual in nature, not entirely rational. And yet, we're presented every night with the nightly news, which paradoxically tries to rationally convey the world's business in the form of a series of powerful, psychologically influential, emotionally overwhelming pictures. The car crash, the summit, the dog saved from the fire, image after image after image. The problem, though, in a culture from which we get most of our information from images is that images are very slippery things. They don't have a clear and compelling and reliable relationship to truth. As much as we believe a picture is worth 1,000 words and kind of default to thinking, yeah, pictures are truth, what we have to realize is that the way in which we process a visual environment, and ours is primarily visual, is largely not on rational, but on aesthetic terms. That in a world of images, beauty is truth. Beauty is reality. Why are there now vast industries dedicated to photoshopping, to digitally shaping, to ensuring the cosmetics industry and plastic surgery is alive and well? Because as a category, truth, and as a category, reason, have become unreliable in a visual world. When you look at a picture, the only thing you can know, truly know, is it attractive or is it not? So beauty becomes a way of defining what's true. Beauty becomes a way of defining what's moral. Sarah Palin, think about it. Why does Sarah Palin work? Because she makes aesthetically pleasing a powerful message that some people find unsettling, some people find okay. But again, she aestheticizes a politic that is often a little ugly at bottom. The kind of politic that shoots wolves from helicopters and all those things. Number 8, sort of a meta point. We live in what Deborah Cameron calls a communication culture. A communication culture. Now, most of us grew up in a world where media were seen as kind of servants to politics, servants to economics, servants to society. On the sidelines, yes or no, sir, doing various kinds of work and mediating between various kinds of institutions. So you turn on a TV show and you see a politician, you see a religious person, you see a public intellectual talking, etc. Media there to provide us with a kind of public service, a utility in some sense. What has happened, though, as the power of media has grown, is that media have moved from the periphery to the center of our culture. And so more and more, and we've only just begun to see what this means, more and more, everything in the world, in some sense, has to make itself now available to media to be understood, to succeed, to sell, to survive. And again, I often tell my communications graduates before I send them off in the world that the world is now theirs in some sense, because communication is now the ultimate currency, right? If you aren't known, if your message isn't out there, you haven't got oxygen, and your business, your idea dies. But the problem is that a lot of us, most of us, even communication students, aren't really equipped with the intellectual tools to engage with the new centrality of communications and media as powerful forces. I mean, think about George Bush. What made him a successful president? Public relations. There wasn't a lot there. Sorry to surprise you. There wasn't a lot there, right? But he had expert communications help, notably in the form of Karl Rove, who made that presidency work and sold this guy, who probably would have been successful maybe running a hardware store, into the most powerful person on earth for 8 years. For 8 years. So what we have here is a world increasingly that takes its cues from communications, rather than communications becoming, as it used to be, a kind of servant to various other kinds of processes. And that changes what politics is, it changes what economics is, it changes what education is, it changes many of the other prevailing discourses and domains of experience that we know. Number 9. 9 and 10 are kind of bundled. What do we do? How do we be smarter people? One of the things that interests me right now professionally is what I've taken to calling a higher professionalism, or a critical professionalism. Often when you look at the post-secondary system, and this is all I've known, this is all I've done apart from working in a factory as a kid, you're looking at a kind of binary. On the one hand, you have academic education, like many of you. I did a BA, then an MA, and a PhD, et cetera, or done some combination of those degrees. And academicians typically are not very interested in the professional world, not really very interested in what you do with the knowledge once you get out there. I've spent 20 years sending students out into the wilderness and not really knowing what they're going to do when they get there. And I think in some sense that's a failure on my part and that of my craft, communications in an academic context. But on the other side of the equation is our professional degrees and schools that, especially like the 5 new universities in BC or the college system, which really kind of work the professional angle and try to make you the best practitioner of a given craft. But what they don't equip you with is a kind of sophisticated knowledge of the world, of history, of literature, of art, of botany. I mean, you got to know stuff. And professional degrees and professional schools tend to define knowledge in very narrow, very pragmatic terms. But any communication student, his or her job when they go into the world is not to use tools. Yes, they know the tools. It's not to put together a communications plan or to sell a product or service. Of course they're doing that, an idea. But they are also always creating the culture in which all of us live. And if they don't know things, if they haven't read books, if they aren't smarter than the average person about the way the world works, their messages reflect nothing. They teach us nothing. They give the world back nothing. If you will, they are kind of dead on arrival because there's nothing that's being said. A higher professionalism, whatever your professional degree might be, whether it's an MBA or a communications or environment or leadership, it's your obligation at Royal Roads to bring together the professional and the academic, the really smart kind of best practices-driven professional knowledge and a deep and abiding knowledge of history, culture, nature, the human soul in one integrated package. Not to see them as binaries that compete with each other, but to realize that these are two things that work powerfully together in a kind of dynamic tension. In that spirit, in the spirit of a higher professionalism, almost done. People will say to me, David, I know that there's a lot in media that I don't like. There's a lot that I don't want my children to see. Of course. But I have the power to turn it off. And I'll say to them, but yes, you do. But your neighbor's not turning it off. The kid across the street isn't turning it off. The guy with the very loud TV set in the next apartment is not turning it off. You live in a world that can't turn it off. And by dint of that, if you define your resistance or your opposition or your scrupulousness relative to media by just turning it off, which is important, how we ration our media, in some sense you've really failed the conversation. We are all impelled, as I said at the outset, to be as creative as we are in making our culture a good place to live and an engaged and thoughtful and enlightened place to live as we are in making the natural world or the social world safe places to live. Tim, I'm going to play the clip now. This is a clip this went viral yesterday, so this is like totally old now.
Now, back at your grades, now back to mine. Sadly,
Tim, start it
If you
again.
stop studying in the cave,
Hold it.
hello, scholars. Look at you.
Okay, bring it back. And just hold it. That's great. You've probably all seen the Old Spice ads, right? Very clever, this gorgeous man, he comes out of the shower. And I mean, the men here know Old Spice. I mean, please. I mean, it's very bad stuff. Don't put it on your body. What's that?
It's so old, it's new again.
Yeah, I know. It still smells like a chemical factory. But anyway, Old Spice, really. But anyway, taken a bad product and made it a sensation by this very clever piece of marketing, featuring this gorgeous man kind of selling this product with this clever commentary. What you've seen now are some interesting media homage that take the same grammar and turn it around. And I thought this message was one very relevant to anyone thinking about coming back to school. This is from Brigham Young University, so go.
Hello, scholars. Look at your grades. Now look at mine. Now back at your grades, now back to mine. Sadly, they're not like mine. But if you stop studying in the cave and started studying like me, they could be like mine. Look at your shirt. Now back to mine. Now look down, back up. Where are you? In the library. With the man your grades could be like. Did you know that 8 out of 5 dentists say that studying in the library is 6 bajillion times more effective than studying in your shower? Now open your eyes. Where are you? You know, YouTube's a quiet place where you can study. Look at your hand. Now back to me. I have it. It's a laptop with access to bucket loads of library databases. Look again. The laptop is now a celestial sandwich here in the snack zone. Anything's possible when you're in the library. I'm a god. Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about living in the contemporary, especially with YouTube and other media of this nature, is that as big as this system has gotten, it has become much more vulnerable because of the nature of the internet and kind of viral media to cultural jiu-jitsu, where you get a very small thing, a YouTube clip, can turn over a whole campaign and actually offer a message that's more important than some sort of smelly chemical that you put on your body. So what we see here is someone, if you will, not turning it off, but turning it on in a different way, turning on the culture and engaging it to offer, kind of a lovely message. The last thing I want to say, in terms of, again, trying to find a still place in this swiftly tilting world, to kind of put yourself in the world in a way where you feel, to some degree, in control, is in terms of what I call the kind of trust the body mantra. The best antidote to media, and we spend think of how much time you spend in a given day on a computer, television, reading a newspaper, a magazine, on your PDA, checking your iPad, etc. The best antidote we have to the kind of excess and overwhelming nature of media is to take a walk, is to have a conversation with a friend, is to make everything in your mind still, quiet, and to live inside your body. Media are constantly trying to hold your emotions, your feelings, your subconscious hostage and then sell it to you at a moment of great vulnerability. In fact, the best essay on TV I've ever read is by a guy named Mark Crispin Miller. It's called Deride and Conquer. Deride is in derision and conquer. TV's magic, says Miller, is that it makes the real world look stupid. It derides it. The endless laugh track, the endless jokes, that what TV does, if you will, it makes everything that is not TV look stupid and silly and colorless. thereby bringing you more deeply inside the kind of grammar of television. TV is still the dominant medium in our lives. So one way to kind of defeat the deride and conquer sort of imperative is to live inside the body, to take that quiet walk, to reclaim your consciousness, reclaim your senses, and put the kind of jangling, noisy media system at bay, just for a little while. So while you're here, as you finish, take a walk, get some air, look at the $1 million view. Thank you very much.
David, we would be remiss if we didn't thank you for your extracurricular activities.
It's a remote control. I always get this. Yeah.